In this video, we're going to critique Bret Weinstein's assessment of the Jordan Peterson-Sam Harris debates. Stick around. Last week, Rebel Wisdom released an interview with Bret Weinstein, the moderator for the first 2 of 4 Jordan Peterson-Sam Harris debates that took place this summer, regarding his thoughts on the debates and their aftermath. But before proceeding with this critique, I must provide a trigger warning to atheists of the new atheist variety. Advance with caution, and ready up those keyboards to rip me a new one in the comments. But if you can make it through the whole video, you're a cut above the rest. Alright, let's get started.
I think for each of them, there is a vindication, and then there's a bitter pill. And in Sam's case, the vindication is that, in fact, the universe does not need some divine entity to explain any of the phenomena that we see.
If Bret only has in mind here the lack of necessity for theological speculation or import regarding doing science, for example when explaining or figuring out the hydraulic cycle, then I have no gripe with this statement. However, at face value, and taken in light of this comment,
there is no God in the sky who cares about human affairs and is meddling in them. That much is true.
It sounds like he's saying that theism is explanatorily impotent altogether. In other words, we don't need God to explain anything at all. 1, this is not representative of the events. I watched all 4 of the Peterson-Harris debates, some, much to my dismay, even multiple times. And even if Bret's claim here that theism is explanatorily impotent is true, this point was never established, much less even discussed in any of the debates. 2, unestablished and highly contestable assertion spoken as fact. For the sake of argument, let's say that all phenomena in the universe, material or otherwise, is fully explicable without any appeal to theism. This would still leave unexplained the existence of the universe itself, or the fact that anything exists at all. In fact, this is the most fundamental question of philosophy. Why is there something rather than nothing? And it is often reasoned by philosophers of religion and metaphysicians that all things that exist are dependent for their existence upon a transcendent, metaphysically necessary being. Now, for the moment, I'm not saying that's neither true nor false, but this comment by Bret, 1, is not descriptive of the Peterson-Harrison debates, and 2, axiomatically asserts atheism without any reservation. But maybe the interviewer is also an atheist, and this is a shared operative assumption in this interview. Alright, next is a very big section, and then after that we're going to finish out with a bunch of small ones.
Jordan is in the situation of having a vindication of his belief that these myths in which he has argued that there is a great deal of meaning are in fact what he says they are. They are a kind of wisdom, and they are profoundly important in human history. For him, the bitter pill is that they are not timeless. There is no magic formula that would imbue them with the ability to tell us what we should do in novel circumstances. Because these myths are the product of adaptive evolution, they are limited in utility to the circumstances in which they evolved. And because we live in circumstances that don't look anything like the situation of thousands of years ago, we should be suspect of these stories and their relevance to our modern problems. Technology has rendered the entire landscape novel, and so it is not that there will be no element in all of the mythology that carries over to this day, but overwhelmingly there will be a mismatch between those myths and our modern circumstances. So from the perspective of should we treat them as God-given and learn from them, no. If ever there was a time not to do that, this is that time.
1, genre misunderstanding. He keeps referring to unspecified myths and mythology, but in the context of religious, specifically theistic, systems of belief. Peterson and Harris talked a lot about the Bible in their dialogues, so my guess is that Bret has the Bible in mind here. Now, if that's the case, he doesn't seem to understand it. The Hebrew and Christian Bibles are multi-genred collections of books. There's wisdom literature, poetry, law, history, and so on. I mean, shoot, most of the books of the New Testament are letters. So even if you take a very low view regarding the historical reliability of the more historical elements of the biblical canons, to treat the canons as a whole as mythology just doesn't make any sense. It's a fundamental error in interpretation, or genre categorization. 2, it's too reductive. While it is the case that systems of belief, theistic or otherwise, have various degrees of fitness value, to treat them as merely cognitive or cultural or social constructs to perpetuate the species is to fail to understand them. Now, taking an evolutionary approach to religion is fine, but it's far too narrow of a perspective to adequately understand it. I would agree that it is an interesting approach that highlights certain features of belief systems and has its own value, but it says absolutely nothing to the truth value or even the intended truth value of such systems. However, what makes Bret's approach here even more limited, and perhaps even disconnected, is not just that he seems to be only looking at religious systems of belief from the perspective of evolutionary biology, but that he seems to have in the background of this approach the presumption of an atheistic metaphysic or worldview, and there's no reason to not apply this same evolutionary approach to atheistic systems of belief. And for clarity's sake here, I'm using the term atheism in the classical philosophical sense of the proposition or belief that there is no God or gods. 3, and finally on this segment, he presents a non sequitur. Without a doubt, our environment is rapidly changing and is radically different than the environment of our ancestors. Communication, travel, commerce, and so many other things are completely different. For example, we didn't evolve in an environment with telephones, text messaging, computers, the internet, social media, and we aren't meant to be sitting in front of a desk of screens all day every day. However, what has remained is human nature. Human desires, human needs, human proclivities, human evils, and human goods. Questions regarding human nature, morality, ultimate meaning, the world, and how to best live in it persist to this day. And I don't see how in any way technology changes these things, or renders obsolete some of our society's foundational resources for meaning and guidance. As Peterson mentioned in one of the later dialogues, or debates, the moral of the 16-verse-long story of Cain and Abel is virtually as relevant now as it was when it was written. Why? Because it speaks to human nature. Now, of course, just as Bret presupposes an atheistic metaphysic, the Bible presupposes a theistic metaphysic. So I will say that the Bible is not nearly as relevant given atheism than it is given theism. But that has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with metaphysics. Alright, props for hanging in there. Now we're going to move on to a bunch of shorter points.
The fact that they can hear each other now, and even to the point on the second night in Vancouver of being able to properly steelman each other's position, I think is tremendous progress.
100%. The fact that Harris didn't strawman his opposition in that 60 seconds is tremendous progress for him. But fairly representing your opposition isn't anything new in public discourse. It might be rare within many sectors of public discourse, especially surrounding political discourse, but it's by no means unheard of or even uncommon, even if it isn't given as much publicity as combative exchanges. Now, if you want to see a cordial, technical, formal debate between an atheist and a theist, for example, see William Lane Craig versus Eric Wielenberg. I'll put a link in the description, but part of the reason for the comparatively high quality of their debate is because they're both philosophers debating philosophy, instead of scientists with overinflated egos debating subjects of which they know nothing. And I'm not talking about Bret here, by the way. On to the next.
There is no God in the sky who cares about human affairs and is meddling in them. That much is true.
Cut it. Okay. Let's take a moment to talk about this God in the sky or man in the sky meme that's been going around all these years. From everything I've seen of Bret, he's pretty much always respectful, thoughtful, intelligent, and fair. And in this clip, he is describing the new atheist position. See, the thing is, this concept of God would hardly make it out of a children's Sunday school class, much less a university. Does this God or man in the sky meme sound anything like the ground of being that we mentioned at the beginning of this video? Does it resemble anything like an incorporeal, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, transcendent yet immanent, self-sufficient, metaphysically necessary being whose essence is his existence and in whom and through whom all things consist and of whom we can only speak analogically? Oh, but CB, you're talking philosophical theology. You're talking about the God of the Greek philosophers, not the God we read about in the Bible. Well, check out 1 Kings 8:27b. The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? And Acts 17:28, for in him we live and move and have our being. And this isn't even to touch on apophatic or mystical theology or literature, which is permeated with attestations of the utter ineffability of God. So, in all gentleness, this God in the sky or man in the sky meme is a textbook straw man that only makes one look unfamiliar with actual theistic belief.
The debate is not so much between Jordan and Sam anymore. I think what they have done is they have established the landscape in which this debate takes place.
Well, the landscape they supposedly established rests upon the ungrounded and highly contestable supposition that religion, whatever that means, is merely a tool for the fitness value of its users, speaking nothing at all to metaphysics or ultimate reality. In any case, I will concede to Bret here that anything that brings people out of the intellectual abyss that is New Atheism and into a more sophisticated atheistic worldview is indeed progress within that group.
I don't call myself an atheist. I think almost anybody who tried to evaluate my belief system would probably come to the conclusion that that's what I am, but I've actually been made so uncomfortable by the simplicity of New Atheism that my feeling is I can't even afford that saying atheist is now taking sides in a debate where I'm not on one of these sides. I would like to be completely hard-headed about what is true in the universe, but I do not want to back people into a corner whose beliefs arise through an evolutionary process. So I hope one day that this particular discussion has had the stigma taken out of it so that it is comfortable to embrace atheism as no more than a description of what is true about phenomena in the universe, that it doesn't carry an ideological component. But as long as it carries an ideological component, I'm cautious about saying that about myself.
Here he expresses the negative connotations associated with the label of atheist and his disinterest in persuading people out of systems of belief he considers to be false because they are serving a positive function. Now, I'm sympathetic to both points here, but I think if Bret were to embrace the label of atheist, which would accurately describe him, then that would be one step closer to burning off that new atheist or anti-theistic connotation. Moreover, if sophisticated and respectful atheists such as Michael Ruse, Thomas Nagel, and Eric Wielenberg, for example, were given more press and invited to public debates and discussions, more than sophomoric and inflammatory atheists such as Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, then this would also aid in counteracting that negative connotation. However, part of the reason for their popularity is that they sell popular books. So to the atheists watching this video, if you're really an atheist and not someone simply rebelling against their parents and looking to read someone more articulate than yourselves ignorantly talk about how much religion sucks, then do yourselves a favor. Buy less Sam Harris and more Tom Nagel. I'll put a link in the description below. But okay, moving on to the final point.
So the sacred is simply that stuff which is so fundamental to function that one ought not tinker casually.
The word sacred has a relatively wide semantic range, and Bret's definition here overlaps with a solid bit of that range. However, the highest definition of the sacred refers to the highest of realities, commonly in reference to divinity. Since Bret's worldview doesn't seem to allow for the existence of such realities, his use of the word sacred is going to be incomplete. Interestingly enough, one of Jordan Peterson's biggest influencers, the late Mircea Eliade, was perhaps best known for his writings on the human experience and conceptions of the sacred. So let's close with a reading from his book, The Sacred and the Profane. The extraordinary interest aroused all over the world by Rudolf Otto's Das Heilige, The Sacred, published in 1917, still persists. Its success was certainly due to the author's new and original point of view. Instead of studying the ideas of God and religion, Otto undertook to analyze the modalities of the religious experience. Gifted with great psychological subtlety, and thoroughly prepared by his twofold training as theologian and historian of religions, he succeeded in determining the content and specific characteristics of religious experience. Passing over the rational and speculative side of religion, he concentrated chiefly on its irrational aspect. For Otto had read Luther, and understood what the living God meant to a believer. It was not the God of the philosophers, of Erasmus, for example. It was not an idea, an abstract notion, a mere moral allegory. It was a terrible power, manifested in divine wrath. In Das Heilige, Otto sets himself to discover the characteristics of this frightening and irrational experience. He finds the feeling of terror before the sacred, before the awe-inspiring mystery, the majesty that emanates an overwhelming superiority of power. He finds religious fear before the fascinating mystery, in which perfect fullness of being flowers. Otto characterizes all these experiences as numinous, from Latin numen, meaning God, for they are induced by the revelation of an aspect of divine power. The numinous presents itself as something wholly other, something basically and totally different. It is like nothing human or cosmic. Confronted with it, man senses his profound nothingness, feels that he is only a creature, or, in the words in which Abraham addressed the Lord, is but dust and ashes. The sacred always manifests itself as a reality of a wholly different order from so-called natural realities. It is true that language naively expresses the tremendum, or the majestas, or the mysterium fascinans by terms borrowed from the world of nature, or from man's secular mental life. But we know this analogical terminology is due precisely to human inability to express the ganz and dir, the wholly other, of a different realm.